Hi everybody. Even though your technical report is not due until the last week of class, it is the major writing assignment for this course. So I want to kind of introduce it gradually. So this week we're focusing primarily on good news, bad news messages, and you're preparing a short either memo, letter, or email. But I also want to introduce the technical report. You will read the chapter in Lannan on the technical report for next week. But before then, I want you to start exploring the research resources available to you through Delta and thinking about your topic. If you have a chance to go ahead and read the chapter on the tech report this week as well, that would not be a bad idea because it comes up pretty quickly. We'll be already at the halfway mark for the course very shortly, and it's a lot of writing to do in a few weeks, and so it's better to start thinking about it in advance. This week's work on the technical report will have you sharing 3 possible topics and some notion of what kind of research you think you might need to conduct for those, and then what type of analysis you think you might want to conduct. Those types of analyses are especially important. This is not a comp paper. Okay, it is a technical report which is going to use data, apply a form of analysis to that data, and then draw a conclusion based on that form of analysis. All right, so the purpose of research, first of all, and this is sort of in general, but I want you to apply this especially to why one might conduct research kind of in the real world. The purpose of research is to generate a genuinely new knowledge or a new understanding about something. Okay, new knowledge is primary research. In other words, what university labs, corporate labs, what scientists do, that is generating new knowledge. New understanding is generally what you're looking for, and when you prepare your report, what you hope to provide your readership, a new understanding of the facts that are out there. Okay, this is why secondary research is so important. For the secondary research is when you look up journal articles, census statistics, whatever, when you get the data which others have gathered, that allows you to gain that fresh understanding without you yourself having to do all of that primary research yourself. Although some primary research is really useful. Your text will talk about conducting surveys, interviews. As you begin exploring your topic, one thing that I'm more than happy to help you with is suggesting places or ways you might look at using primary research as you develop your topic. The key word is new. In other words, you don't want to go into your research with a fixed idea of what you're going to find out at the end. This is one reason it's sometimes a good idea to avoid topics that are too close to your heart, unless you're willing to have your opinions be changed by the data that you gather. Okay? Or there's something you just feel very, very strongly about. I ask you to avoid the big issues anyhow. So legalizing marijuana, teen drink, lowering the drinking age, things like that. Largely because these tend to produce exactly the same essay over and over and over again. And part of the reason students are tempted to pose them is because they might have written an essay on that in the past, or they might have some ideas that they come up with in the past. But something like, for example, the drinking age, what your analysis would have to do is really step back and think carefully, okay, what are the factors that we need to use to decide whether this is a good thing or a bad thing? So your initial batch of research would be to look into all the different things that are impacted by that decision. So accident rates, insurance rates, all those sorts of things. You can't say, well, because I can go into the military, I should be able to drink, because that's not really the determining factor. It's kind of a common sensey sort of argument, but that's not based on data. And that doesn't have any sort of persuasive impact. If somebody agrees with you already, they'll buy it. If somebody has specific concerns due to accident rates, insurance rates, those sorts of things that are really what fuel the legislators' conversation about these things, well, then you're not going to address those at all. Okay, so you need to choose a topic you can be objective about, and then let your research and your analysis shape your conclusions. Research is not just a collection of quotes from sources. You will be integrating your sources into your document, and I'll present on that in a couple of weeks. Okay, it's not just a report based only on your opinions or ideas. What you're doing is bringing these two things together. Here are my sources. Here's what they have to say about it. Now, if we look at this, and this is your analysis, okay, now that I've analyzed this, here's the conclusion I've come up with. So in the end, yes, you're going to formulate an opinion, but your opinion is going to be the conclusion, or arrived at at the conclusion of your research and analytical process. You need to use your sources effectively. We'll talk about the MLA format, and I'm going to talk about integrating sources, as I said before. This is essential for credibility. To avoid plagiarism, you need to know how to incorporate your sources into your essay. So your research should help you initially deepen your understanding of your subject. So you may want this week to do some preliminary reading. These are sources that will probably not find their way into your tech report. For example, one of the sources I recommend in the resources folder, the research resources folder, is something called Issues and Controversies, which we have access to through the Delta Library databases. That is nothing you would ever quote in a final document, but what it does is it gives you a bird's eye view of issues and then suggests additional reading. So if you're kind of interested in a subject and you really want an overview to make sure your views are balanced, those sorts of resources, this preliminary research is very important. Then the research you conduct, once you get the right kind of sources, you've got the sources you need, that research then forms the basis of your analysis, and it will support the conclusions you've made, not argue for you. In other words, you're not going to find some expert who agrees with you and just quote them. Right? You're going to build in the case, the data that supports your conclusion, and walk us through the argument yourself. Just like writing, research is a process. First step in this process, selecting and limiting. The goal of this first stage is to kind of get a big view of your subject. What issues are related to the topic? If you're starting with a big issue like workplace equity, right, part of what you're going to want to do is narrow that down, partially because you probably can't tackle workplace equity in a report that's like 8 pages long. Okay, but also there may be more important, more interesting sub-issues connected to this. Okay, and I suggest a few on this slide. Issues and controversies, or a preliminary search in InfoTrack, and especially if you go into InfoTrack and then search, look at the subject headings. These are great ways to help you identify kind of the various aspects of a broader issue to help you decide what you might want to focus on. Stage 2 is focusing and planning, and this is really important. The first step here is to generate research questions. This means you think about what you need to find out before you go and start really digging too deep into your research. You've done some preliminary research, you now understand your subject, so what is it that I need to know? So I decided to do drinking age. I'm going to focus on its impact on the automotive industry, legislation, insurance, all of that. What are the questions I have then? Okay, well, what are the differences in insurance rates between states with a 21 drinking age and an 18 drinking age? Are there differences in accident rates? Those are the sorts of things you'd want to find out. When you have these questions in place, it actually makes your research easier because you can now go after exactly the stuff you need. Then think about the kinds of sources that will be most useful to you. Okay, for example, web sources are great because they're up to date, but they're not always reviewed and vetted as carefully as things like magazines and journals. Okay, for some types of topics, there may be a lot of academic research, and to really get a handle on it, you'll have to have an expert opinion. So, for example, if you're talking about some sort of medical condition, yes, there are a lot of resources that will help you understand things better, but you really will at some point need to look at expert opinions. Where do those expert opinions in the medical field lay? In medical journals. The next step is where you actually start gathering your sources. And again, I'm kind of stepping back again to those general sources with which you begin, and then start looking at the specific articles, books, and websites that relate to your topic. Don't blow this off, and don't kind of casually in your research question say, well, I'm going to look at some websites. I want to be able to see why you think there's a connection between the kind of source you're looking for and what you're going to be exploring. Where do you think the best information on your subject is likely to be? Okay, you need to give yourself time to read your research and think about it. This is still part of the discovery process. In other words, you're getting an understanding of your subject with every new article you read, so you may get new ideas. You may have to change direction. You may get pointed to other sources. One of the best places to find good sources is in a source. So if you're reading a source and it mentions another expert, mentions another article, mentions another book, you can track that down, and it's a great way of really getting at the best sources. If 2 or 3 of your sources all reference a single report, you should be reading that report. And that should be in your essay rather than these three other sources, unless you want to pick out some specific interpretation that they've given. Okay, so this is part of the discovery process still. And I actually jumped ahead a little bit. Pay particular attention to sources which point you to new sources. Another one is Wikipedia. I don't want to see Wikipedia quoted in your tech report because Wikipedia is not an expert source. However, Wikipedia articles have bibliographies that can point you out to the experts. Okay, it's not the only place to look for those, but it can be a useful place to look for those. Are we done? We're not, because this is an iterative process. In other words, you might go back to any stage of the research process along the way. You read something that changes your outlook on your project, you almost have to go to the beginning. You read something that points you back to another resource, then you might want to go back to the discovery process, read that resource, and let that shape what your thesis or your argument or your analysis is going to be. Okay? And this is all stuff I've just said. I'm getting ahead of my presentation. My apologies. The key here is, though, and this last one is especially important, the research needs to influence how you conduct your research. So as you learn and read and understand your subject more, that will change maybe some of the ways you think about doing your research. This is why you want to start on this right away. Before there's a last-minute crunch to write this, you should be reading your resources. And I'm telling you that well into, only about halfway through the course. So I'm going to say this: if you drag your feet and then last week you're overwhelmed with this technical report, that is nobody's fault but your own. Okay, so I don't want to hear that in any sort of grumbling after the fact. Oh, it was so much, I couldn't get it done in that last week. No, I'm telling you, start on it now. Start on it now. Suggestions for finding a topic. You can begin with a problem or decision you or someone close to you has to make. That can be a useful springboard. I had somebody once who was moving to a college town. I think she was going to Ann Arbor, right? And she was choosing colleges, and she wanted to decide what college town would be best to live in, because it was one of her factors for choosing a college was where it was going to be, where she was going, whether she could afford living there, whether she could find work there. Okay, so it was her own personal situation. But what did she do? She then identified 3 main college towns in Michigan and identified criteria to evaluate them, and then did a comparative analysis. So looking at rent costs, looking at food costs, looking at employment opportunities. Look through textbooks of the courses that you like. A lot of times they have suggestions for paper topics or suggestions for further research, or just use them as a springboard to find topics that might interest you. Look through subject headings in the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature or the online databases. The Reader's Guide is a hard copy kind of index of articles published on all sorts of different subjects in America. What's nice about it is it's organized by subject. So you can actually skim through subjects. It's sort of like I was saying with the Delta databases with issues and controversies. You can kind of browse through and see if anything strikes your fancy, if anything interests you. Look through an encyclopedia or Wikipedia. Sometimes if you start with a subject that kind of generally interests you, the references to other articles or the links to other articles will help you explore that subject in a very broad way, and then you'll stumble on that topic you really like. Look over magazines or websites that you enjoy. And again, look for something appropriate to this assignment. But notice all of these things have what in common? You're looking for something that's going to interest you. So again, that discussion question has you explain to me why you want to write about this subject. And it can't be some sort of abstract, I think it's important because I think the drinking age needs to be considered objectively. No, tell me why it connects to you personally. Okay, that filters out a lot of those sorts of arguments. I'm against the capital punishment. Well, how does it connect to you personally? Are you on death row? Do you have somebody on death row? I did have somebody who had a brother who was going through a trial for murder, and it wasn't a capital punishment case. It was it had to do with how witness data was collected, if I remember correctly. But that was a case where it was a bigger issue, but she did have a personal connection. That personal connection is absolutely essential. Nonfiction shows you like. That might trigger a possible topic. Think back on the last argument or disagreement you had with somebody. What was that about? Could there be an idea there? Then think of something you believe that most people might not, within reason, not things like flying saucers. But let's start with flying saucers. For example, if you had an interest in UFOs, You cannot write a technical report on whether aliens exist based on Thor Heyerdahl or all these various kind of UFO magazines, but you could look at that, and you could potentially, for example, look at the approach of astronomers trying to determine what the chances of life in the universe are. Or you could look at the psychological reasons, explanations given for abduction stories, or the sociological reasons. There are all sorts of more uh, objective, technical, scientific approaches you can take to these things. Do not snatch something that doesn't interest you just because you think it's going to be easy. You have to be able to spend time reading about the topic. You've got to be able to think creatively about the topic, and you must be able to narrow the topic down sufficiently. Okay? You'll read stuff. If you're going to do this right, you will read stuff that doesn't find its way into your tech report. Do you want to read a bunch of stuff about something that doesn't interest you? And I know what's going to happen. You won't read that much stuff, and you won't have what you need for that technical report in the end. It'll bore you. You'll be busy with other things, and you won't read it. And you need to. And you need to be able to engage with it with your brain turned on, which is hard to do when it's something that's really boring. If it's something that interests you, your brain's going to automatically be in gear, and you'll be processing stuff and making connections and being creative because it interests you. If you choose something that bores you, it's really, really hard for anybody to be creative and be very interesting. Look for narrow topics. Not so narrow that you can't get enough data on them, but don't start with a huge broad. You can start with a broad topic, but you need to narrow it down to something that's manageable. I know it seems like a long essay. 8 pages seems like forever, but it's not that long when it comes right down to it. Okay? When it comes down to trying to tackle global warming or something like that in a very broad way, and again, you might be able to come up with a topic that will work for global warming, but you've got to run it by me and see. This is a topic about which books are written. Okay, so it might be hard to tackle that specifically in an essay of this length. And then the types of analysis. You need to do one of these types of analysis. And so if your topic doesn't lend itself to those types of analysis, then you're out of luck. I would not try to kind of squeeze it in there. Make sure you get topics that require a number of sources. Try to avoid topics that you feel really strongly. I want you to be interested, but if you can't think objectively, if you feel strongly and you can think objectively, that's fine. But if you think your feelings are going to affect how you filter the stuff you read, then you want to avoid it. And then topics that might require really advanced or specialized knowledge. So, analyzing chemotherapy treatments, for example. If you've got some medical background, you might be able to pull it off. But if you find that you really don't have the expertise, it's going to take you so much general reading, preliminary reading, interviews. If you had a year to write a book on this, you could probably do the legwork. For a tech report you're preparing in a few weeks, you really don't want to step into something that's going to require you to get so much background knowledge that, by the time you've got the background knowledge, you need to understand the journal articles you're going to read or understand the primary data you're going to be looking at. You've run out of time to write the tech report. So something that is accessible, a topic that is accessible for you that you'll be able to get into. Okay, getting started. Let me give you an example of a topic, and as we do this, I'll hit those kinds of analysis. So I'm beginning with, I want to figure out what kind of car is the best car to buy. What sort of research questions might I have? Okay, who's doing the buying? Essential, right? Who is the top? Because different people need different kinds of cars depending on what they're going to be using them for. What criteria do you use to evaluate a car? Well, that's going to, again, be based on that first question. There may be some objective things that are kind of across the board, like reliability. But if I'm a starving student, reliability might not be my first choice. Maybe I'm getting a car that I know I'm going to drive for only a couple of years while I'm in college, and then as soon as I get a job, I plan on buying a better car. So maybe it is initial cost up front might be the single most important factor. And what kind of analysis am I undertaking? And here are the 3 kinds of analysis you can choose from, or you can choose a combination of these. These are in the chapter on the technical report, which you'll be reading for next week. Causal analysis looks at why something happens, or what will happen if you do something. Okay, so the question is, why is the bee population dying so heavily this year here in Michigan? That's a causal analysis. Comparative analysis is when you're trying to decide which of 2 options is better. or multiple options is better. So obviously the case of buying a car, it's a comparative analysis. Feasibility is when you're trying to decide if something's doable or is a good idea. Sometimes when you are writing a problem-solving tech report, you're trying to figure out whether a solution will work. That's a feasibility analysis. Okay, so causal, why does this happen? Comparative, which one's better? Feasibility, is this possible or is it a good idea to try to do this? And then you can combine these. So here's my modified topic. What's the best car for people like me, a college student who commutes to work and school, to buy? What kind of analysis? Comparative. I'm going to identify a number of vehicles that kind of fit the general parameters that I've laid out. I need a car that has good gas mileage, can't be too expensive, ideally something that will help me on insurance. Okay. And then I will use those as criteria. And here we go. These are the criteria I've selected. What research questions will I have? Well, how much can people in my situation afford? Okay, so I'll be looking into demographic data for college students to see how much income they tend to generate and how much of that income is left after tuition. How long are they likely to own the car? That's important, right? So this is one of the things I'll have to find out, because things like reliability, for example, become less important if you're not going to own the car for very long. You probably don't want to buy a new car if you're not going to own the car for very long. You may consider leasing if you've got a decent credit rating and you're not going to have the car for very long. And then what other considerations might they have? Okay, and that you'll have to generate. Then finally, you'd identify the cars which meet these criteria, and then these would be the cars upon which you would conduct your primary analysis. So notice as your research questions are still laying the groundwork for your topic. They're helping you decide what exactly to write about. I've touched these already. I apologize. I jumped ahead a little bit. I was kind of on a roll there. So primary research is the research that you conduct yourself. Surveys and interviews are very common forms of primary research used for these tech reports. An interview can be especially useful if you're kind of feeling your way around a field you don't know very much about. The interviewee can a lot of times help you in a way that an article or a book can't. They might not always be a great source for the tech report itself, though, and you have to be careful about that. If they're not really an expert but they're an informed person, I would say, for example, an instructor. If you ask a biology instructor about something, he or she will be able to point you towards expert resources, and depending on their academic background, they may themselves be an expert resource, but you just have to look out for that. And they'll tell you. They'll say, listen, this is what I know about it. Here's a place to go and find out more. Or they'll say, yeah, this is what I did my master's thesis on. So yeah, here's my expertise. And in that case, you would use their expertise. Okay. For this paper, what car to buy, what kind of sources will be best? Am I going to go to academic journals in order to research a good car? No, I'm not. Consumer reports I'll go to, right? Government websites and documents and things like that that might address car safety, for example. The Census Bureau for the kinds of stats I was looking for on the demographic, on college students in certain towns, how much they're going to pay rent, how much they're going to. This will vary, in other words, from subject matter, depending on the subject matter of the tech report. The kinds of resources will vary. If it's a medical thing, some sort of journals will probably be involved. In this case, journals probably won't be appropriate. And that's it. So for this week, I want you to start thinking about your topic, think carefully, and provide thoughtful responses to the discussion board post on topic. Remember, for that one, you do not need to post follow-ups, although you're welcome to if you'd like. I'll be ducking in and giving you feedback on your topic as you post them.